Welcome everybody to the 6th of hopefully many Degenesis lore drop videos. First of all, I must address what I shall from now on call Modus Gate. Last video I said that the chronicler in Cathedral City, supposed to be a fragment called Modus, was in fact a paler. But of course he isn't. The Eliza page in Moloch says that he is a paradigma disguised as a fragment, and I, for whatever reason, thought paradigma was a paler rank. It isn't, he's a chronicler, he's still disguised and not a fragment, which is weird. But thank you very much for setting this straight, dear commenters, and to all the new subscribers and commenters. Please keep telling me if I make dumb mistakes like that. Maybe in this new video about Chernobog. Now, I hope you'll enjoy it. Like, subscribe, and comment for more. The marauder Chernobog is also known as the Black God, and has been worshipped by the clans of the East Borken forests for centuries. East Borkens have told stories of a giant whose soul was eroded by time, finally claimed by death itself, while the immortal body remained in an eternal limbo. He is described as a giant with an elongated body, empty eye sockets, and a ruined nose. Bleached cables stick out of his skull. Some of them lead back into his body, while others end in dangling rat skulls and glittering artifacts. He moves his head back and forth constantly, as if he was sniffing. The Black God once climbed down into the ravines of the ruins and remained there for many winters, becoming a shadowy curse. The woodfolk have tried to appease Chernobog with animal carcasses, carved figurines in his image, and wild honey. With these sacrifices they hoped to calm the giant, extend his slumber, so they would be safe from the Black God's wrath, and yet their efforts failed. One day, Chernobog rose from his chasm to roam the woods, stomping and roaring. At first he spared the villages, but as the years passed, more and more settlements vanquished to his rage. The shamans, the spiritual leaders of the East Borken clans, finally calmed the giant, formed a brittle pact with him, and saw him retreat into darkness once more. More than a decade later, in February 2593, Chernobog rose again. The marauders summoned the leaders of the forest tribes to his side and began a deadly march towards the south. His path of destruction led him to Praha. Within days, the city fell to Chernobog and his army, and only days later, the Black God marched on, this time towards the southeast. Before the Eschaton, Chernobog was known as Viktor Karmanov. He was a member of the Recombination Group's board and served as the head of fundings and investment of Project Tannhäuser. Several stream conversations and messages from before the Eschaton, in which Viktor Karmanov plays a role, can be found in the Degenesis books. One of them shows a stream mail Viktor Karmanov wrote to Norman Thorne after Thorne disappeared in Cairo. Thorne made several expensive purchases with recombination group funds after vanishing. In this message, Karmanov tries to contact Thorne to get his former colleague from the RG board to return after he left in search of the prophet Muhammad. We know that his request was never answered. Another conversation is the dispute with a woman called Y, in which Viktor Karmanov heavily attacks her for not being careful enough, hiding her tracks after the apocalyptic sect committed a terrorist attack in London. Christina Spurson also joins the conversation, joining Karmanov in his critique of Y's lack of diligence. Karmanov can also be heard in the second of the 3 transmissions of Muhammad, in which he talks with Christina Spurson about the disappearance of Muhammad, the RG's purchase of the Baikonur space station, and his twin brother's meeting with Jerome Gatrell. Viktor Karmanov seems perplexed that his twin brother Nikita Karmanov did not inform him about the meeting with Gatrell, and that he also did not visit him when he was in town. As Spurson mentions that the topic of the secret meeting was the creation of devices able to diverge refugee flows. We know that the device pitched to Gatrell in the meeting was a prototype of the corresponders that would later be implanted into the recombination group board members' bodies, able to override their nanite bloodstreams, setting off their decay. The corresponders seem to play a bigger role for Chernobog's story than for those of the other marauders. Before the marauder started his bloody march towards Praha, when he still roamed the forests of East Borka, one of the shamans of the forest found a fist-sized artifact in the middle of a village that Chernobog had devastated in a fit of rage. The artifact was black and shapeless, barbs rising from its surface. After the shaman had sprinkled the artifact with ancestral ashes, it awoke. A voice sank through the octaves down to a vibrating bass. Calling itself a corresponder, the artifact shared the secrets of the Black God with the shaman. After that, Chernobog spoke to the shamans through the corresponder. As more corresponders were bestowed, temples were erected around them. Rites were devised, and chosen ones were named. The shamans now knew exactly how to appease their god. They offered him willow bark brew, lowered baskets full of datura, belladonna, and black henbane down into his domicile. They set traps. Nothing would be allowed to disturb Chernobog's rest. On February 2nd, 2593, a receiver signal is picked up all over Europe. The central cluster in Justitian is able to locate it somewhere in the direction of Purgare or the Balkan. It is this very signal that makes the black god Chernobog rise again and which compels him to start his march towards the south. The corresponders in East Borca, probably held not only by the aforementioned shamans, but also by other clan leaders of the region, also react to the signal, and when Chernobog summons them, the marauder speaks to them through the corresponders. While his voice came coaxingly and clearly from the artifacts, his mouth hung limp, making no sound. Chernobog and his army marched south. Hundreds of clans joined in his wake. They came creeping from bunkers or hesitantly leaving their huts. Nomadic people turned from paths that they hadn't left since the dawn of time. Something important was looming ahead. When Chernobog stopped, 10 leaders gathered around him and raised the corresponders above their heads. They listened to the unearthly voice, promising eternal reward. Chernobog didn't stray from his path for even a second. He accepted no diversions, even if he was forced to climb mountains. Praha Republica lay in his path, the last bastion of a dying civilization. No one had ever attacked it, nor crossed its minefields, nor entered the range of its machine gun placements until Chernobog arrived. The city fell only days later. The clans looted the city, and the ancient library went up in flames. But Chernobog's path did not end here, and he did not stop. The news of the fall of Praha spread like wildfire. Throughout Europe, it fueled an idea. It was possible to shake off the yoke of the powerful. Borca's clans became restless. Long ago, they had lost their funeral sites and villages to the Judges and Spitalians. The Balkans no longer felt obligated to the Mohammedans. The idea prospered. Tribes thought long extinct climbed from the ruins and declared themselves rulers. The time has finally come for all the cults to fear for their power. The clans have returned. The city of Osman is the urban center of East Borca, ruled by the Mohammedans. The people here take pride in their urban life. The colorful, noisy markets, the hot baths, and the great underground library established by archivists from Praha in 2512. It is an Edenic garden, a haven in a burning world. But Chernobog's wrath has not spared Osman. Weeks ago, a patrol spotted a figure with giant antlers on its head in the morning haze, surrounded by dozens of spear bearers. This horned one was rumored to have stood with Chernobog as they broke through Praha's first ring of defense. On a misty summer's day in 2595, Osman's inhabitants heard a drawn-out howl. It started softly, but as the seconds passed, it grew louder and louder. The people looked skywards, pointing to two stripes of cloud slowly coming down towards them in a wide arc. An instant later, instead of a place where hundreds of Osmani once laughed, debated, and traded colorful spices and fabric, there was only a blinding fireball. The shock wave from the blast tore through the city, pushing fire and dust ahead of it. People were swept along and thrown against walls like rag dolls. Pieces of debris flew for hundreds of meters, crashing into buildings, tearing swaths of destruction. The thunderclap that followed made glass break and buildings shake. An ochre cloud towered over Osman. After claiming Praha in a wave of violence and destruction, Chernobog continued towards Brno. For weeks, the Black God resided here. In the city center, his clans fashioned a throne from his enemies' bones and weapons for him. He never sat on it, never claimed it. Shouts of Chernobog echoed through the streets wherever he walked. Women offered him their children so that he might spare the city. He shoved past all of them without acknowledging or releasing them with his gaze. The clans followed him. Those who could fled to the Spitalians and Helvetics in the fortress of Spielberg. Finally, the Black God moved on, and the majority of his clans followed him. Chernobog's path has led him and his followers towards Pest, a ghost town of ruins that long ago has been claimed by the psychonauts of the Balkan region, the Dushani. The Dushani sound webs engulf Pest. They grind down stone structures and saw the skin off of careless trespassers. All over the Balkan, the aberrants sway to the rhythm of the songs of Pest. The Balkani avoid the ruins. No voivodat lays claim to this accursed place. All of Pest is a giant amplifier for the Dushani wave, and every building, every hill, and every body of water is included. Any disturbance, even if it is only a cracked branch, multiplies as a dissonance through the wave and makes the aberrants rise. One thing is for sure: they will eliminate the disturbance. Chernobog has come to cause such a disturbance. He orders his clans to the ruins, makes them topple stone steels, and create a corridor into the city. The Dushani wave does break. However, with every inroad, hundreds of the Black God's followers dissipate into bloody mist. Meanwhile, Dushani from all over the land come running to strengthen the wave with their song. The Black God is impatient. He wants to move on. Lights flash in the night sky. Detonations tear the whispering of the woods. Soon, Chernobog will have reached his destiny. His next stop is Beograd. Chernobog's story is heavily connected to another mysterious character of the Degenesis metaplot, The pious of Wrocław has ruled over the flourishing city in Poland for many centuries, and some of the city's inhabitants believe him to be 500 years old. He is a mysterious figure, never showing his face in public, sending his personal god, the Drushiniks, to do his bidding. The pious is one of the most influential people in all of Poland, and he is in fact a sleeper of Project Tannhäuser. 100 years after the Eschaton, the pious rose with the first cascade of sleepers and took to freeing his brethren from the bunkers. Around him, he gathered a group of sleepers named Team Pollux, which might have existed even before the Eschaton, which would eventually lay the groundworks for what would later become Praha. Centuries before Chernobog's war, Team Pollux identified the mythical figure of Chernobog as a former member of Project Tannhäuser by analyzing the creature's bloodstream. They tried to establish contact in hope of more information, instructions even, on the recombination group's plans. The Black God did not speak. Instead, he rose and tore a swath through the ranks of Team Pollux, gorging on their nanite milk and swallowing their empty husks. The pious was the only one to survive the nightmarish massacre. Equipped with an artifact that cloaked the machines in his bloodstream, he was ignored by the dreadful giant. Blind Chernobog could not sense him. The pious fled the scene, terrified by what had become of the recombination group. He used his protocols to forge a coalition of followers who would serve him in revealing the secret of the Marauder and finding out what had caused the total collapse of Project Tannhäuser. He branded this select group his archivists, and together they began their research through the acquisition of artifacts, damaged stream records, bunker intelligence reports, and interrogation transcripts, while using Praha Republica as a base of operations. Their primary agenda was to starve the giant, deny him access to the nanite blood ambrosia until he dropped into extended periods of hibernation. The pious knew that his archivists were no match for Chernobog, but they had to try and tire him to the point in which he would remain in a torpid trance, incapacitated, until they found a way to deal with him. Containment was the pious' only hope. Decades went by in which he studied the paralyzed Marauder, analyzing the powers bestowed upon him prior to the Eschaton. He traced the neural connections implanted in Chernobog's skull, a mental uplink to Minerva's orbital retaliation systems, weapons of mass destruction controlled by the Black God's whims, but inaccessible to his shattered and shrouded mind. The pious' attention was diverted from the trapped Marauder when the rise of Exalt and the city wars ensued. Free spirit had to be stopped, and so the archivists joined the war against Exalt. Praha Republica became the drop-off point for artifacts poached from the enemy during the city wars. Much of what came through was repurposed to fortify Praha and bolster its defenses against a potential attack by Chernobog. In the end, all his efforts would amount to nothing. In 2593, his confidants picked up the same AM pulse signal that was registered by the cluster in the west. The Piest had a hunch that free spirit was back on the rise. That same night he abandoned his base with every artifact that he could carry, knowing full well that nothing would survive Chernobog's wrath. His flight brought him to Wrocław, where he infiltrated the local line of succession and watched while Praha was torn apart by the marauders' wrath. Days later, his spies reported that the needles had been seen in the ruins of Praha, and the Piest froze in shock when he noticed that he had left the ttrpg behind. The needles had found the artifact in the ruins left by the Black God. Most probably through the research done by him and his archivists, the Piest foresaw that the day would come when the signal would launch Chernobog into a frenzy in pursuit of ambrosia. We know who was responsible for the signal that caused Chernobog to start his bloody march towards the south. The free spirit sleeper, Karakan, was the one who climbed the Botev, the highest peak of the Balkan Mountains, and sent the signal that was received all over Europe. Karakan and the free spirits will be the topic of another video. For now, we can record the fact that Karakan was somehow able to control Chernobog, and that his actions not only caused the Black God's campaign, but as a result, also set off the rise of the clans all over Europe. If causing the clan wars was part of his plan is unknown, and we can only speculate. But we do know that Karakan's move and Chernobog's reaction caused a consequence that was most probably not intended by the free spirit. Chernobog's absence made it possible for the Storskis, the East Balkan clan traveling the forests in their giant trains, to build train tracks that lead to the space station in Baikonur. Even though Karakan's actions made the Storskis' progress possible and thereby helped the Needles in achieving their goals, we know that Karakan and his free spirit sleepers have plans that also involve the Fjolger and Jahamet's will, and that run contrary to the plans of the Needles. We also know that Argyre, the marauder ruling over Britain, was waiting for the signal to awaken Chernobog and eventually set him off on his violent campaign. Argyre's intentions and his relationship to Chernobog are also not entirely clear, but we do know that his plans also run contrary to those of the Needles and to those of the Free Spirits. In conclusion, I can only say that Chernobog really is the character that binds the metaplot of Degenesis together. The Marauders, Tannhäuser, Free Spirit, the Needles and the Clan Wars all converge in his story. Alright everyone, thank you for watching the video. I hope you liked it. Many open questions on my mind. For example, does Chernobog act out of free will, or is he in fact controlled through the corresponders somehow? Is he like the other marauders, just on the hunt for nanites, or is he somewhat of a tool of Karakan? The fact that he does not speak kind of hints at something there. I'm not sure. Other questions? Were the corresponders planted all over Eastern Europe for the purpose of one day helping to build Chernobog's army? The text said they were bestowed, but by whom? By Chernobog himself? And what about the Tricklaw corresponder held by Przewalski? And are the clan wars part of Karakan's and thus Free Spirit's plan to fight the cults? Or were they just an unintended consequence? And what exactly is Chernobog looking for in Beograd? And most importantly, have I made some horrible mistakes again? Do tell me in the comments. And also tell me if you liked this slightly longer video. And yeah, then have a great one, people.